Video lesson 5.2, the late Middle Ages. So this will give you some background on the political and social context that led to the Renaissance, and we're going to show you some maps as well to really get into the meat of why this social and intellectual movement began primarily in Italy. So, our essential question for today is what characteristics differentiate the Renaissance from the Middle Ages? So our last unit was about the Middle Ages. This unit is all about the Renaissance and Reformation and kind of changes that occurred during this golden age in Europe, some say. So the political changes in the High Middle Ages are very important to setting up the Renaissance. So again, the High Middle Ages is that 1200 to 1400 time frame. So the kings centralized their power after the decline of feudalism in places such as France, England, Spain, Scotland, Ireland, all the places that you see on this map here. We're going to talk about Italy and the Holy Roman Empire a little bit later on, but we can see kind of France is sort of in the middle here. England actually has power over parts of France, and that comes into play. Ireland is its own separate kingdom. Spain has about 4 or 5 different kingdoms in there. So kings really centralize their power in smaller kingdoms. And of course, we remember that feudalism starts to decline after the Crusades, and the bubonic plague allow for a little bit more social mobility. We also have more trade happening, so more merchants are needed and kingdoms are becoming less self-sufficient. So there is definitely resistance to this growing central power of the king from the nobility. So one of the things that comes out of this is in England in the year 1215, there's a document called the Magna Carta that is written and signed. So King John of England is forced to sign this document, and the document is very important, especially it's very relevant in American history actually, because it is really the first document that places unprecedented limitations on the king's power. So now we had those absolute monarchs that are starting to form in other places. This is really the exception to absolutism. So we see that the king is restricted by the nobility for the first time. So in order to do certain things like raise a tax or to go to war or do other certain things, he has to go through parliament. And that's really the foundations for modern democracy. So because this is such an important document, there's actually one on display at the National Archives, which is the picture you see above King John's head there. So keep in mind the Magna Carta places some limitations, but for the most part, the king's power is very powerful. The strongest monarchies during the High Middle Ages were France and England. And because of that map I showed you before, the 100 Years' War commences. It's actually more than 100 years that France and England are in competition for land and power. And this puts England in tremendous debt. So Edward III gives up power in exchange for a parliament, which is what came out of the Magna Carta. It is composed of the nobility as well as elected representatives to levy taxes or to raise taxes to get them out of debt. And so this gives some power to the parliament as well. But note that this power is shared by the king, and these were definitely the 2 richest and most powerful kings in Europe, in France and England. So we also have some monarchies that are also not so well organized, such as the Holy Roman Empire, which is formerly Charlemagne's land. We saw that map. France was kind of in between where Germany is today and where France is today. So the Holy Roman Empire is kind of loosely organized into city-states in what is now Germany. Likewise, Italy is also loosely organized into independent papal states, such as the Duchy of Milan, the Republic of Florence, and the Republic of Venice. Now, we know Italy's geography is very important because it sticks out into the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. So here is Africa, over here, over that way, is the Middle East, and so places where all those thriving kingdoms surround it. And people, to get to Europe, have to go through Italy. So these become very wealthy principalities. So they are not led by kings, but by princes. And there's also the papal states. Now, we remember our word papal means having to do with the Pope. The Pope actually had control over this territory politically and religiously. So although the Pope was important throughout Europe, the Pope had direct control over these papal states. However, the church starts to decline in the 1300s. So this is one of our defining political changes that European society experienced during the High Middle Ages. The papal claims of supremacy over monarchs was increasingly out of touch with the rising power of kings. People started to respect their king more than they respected the Pope as the true political leader, the true leader of their nation and of their people, and the person to unify all of them together. And because these kingdoms were fighting against each other, they did not really feel that same sense of unity or community with other kingdoms of Europe. So they started to see themselves very differently. They spoke different languages, they were very self-sufficient, they had a different king. What kept them in common was Catholicism. So King Philip IV of France claimed the right to tax the clergy, for instance, and Pope Boniface VIII, who was Pope at the time of King Philip IV, said that he could not tax the clergy without his agreement. So this made the king very angry, and there was a dispute over this. In the middle of this dispute, the Pope dies, and the king gets the cardinals to elect a French Pope, who was obviously going to support his right to tax the clergy. So this led to what's known as the Great Schism. You don't need to write that first bullet point there, that's a duplicate. So the Great Schism, remember, schism means split. So the Great Schism was this period of competing popes in France and Italy. So the elected pope moves to Avignon, France. So this is how you pronounce that. Remember, that was one of our trading locations. So the papacy at Avignon was one papacy. Then there was also a pope back at the Vatican in Italy. So these two popes were both claiming to be the pope of the Catholic Church at the same time. Now remember, France and England had gone to war for 120 years about, and they did not like each other very much. And they had gained strong allies as well as strong enemies along the way. So both popes want the support from the kings of Europe so they could validate their claim, just like our two presidential potential candidates would be vying for votes of all of the American people. So the popes changed their policies of the church to align with the policies of their supporting kings. So they change what the church stands for in order to better suit the needs of the kings who they need that support from the kings. So the kingdoms of France, Spain, Scotland, and southern Italy support the French Pope in Avignon, while the kingdoms of England, Germany, Scandinavia, and Italy, more northern central Italy, support the Roman Pope. So the result is that these popes need to pander to the kings or try to make them like them by saying what they want to hear. So they need to kind of submit themselves to the kings, thereby making the kings more powerful than the popes. The church eventually is reunified, but we see still the lasting impact is that the kings have now claimed that they are more superior than the Pope. So that Great Schism really flips the scale on which is more important, church or state. So this lays the groundwork for the emergence of European nation states. A definition of a nation state is a country unified by common culture. Remember, I said they had the same language, they had the same religion, so these kingdoms you see down on this map are really the formation of the countries that you see today. And it's also unified under one king, one absolute king, which means unchallenged power from those popes. So that should say Louis, L-O-U-I-S. The French monarchy, Louis the 11th, taxed nobility to secure his power. In the English monarchies, the Tudor dynasty is established with Henry VII. If you're familiar with the Tudors, Henry VIII is the son of Henry VII, and his daughter is Queen Elizabeth I. His first daughter is also now known as Bloody Mary, and we'll get to that in a few weeks. This also leads to the unification of Spain. Spain, again, was kind of broken up into these smaller kingdoms. So we have Kingdom of Navarre, Kingdom of Castile, Kingdom of Granada, Kingdom of Aragon. So two, I bet you've heard of these, king and queen. King Ferdinand is from Aragon, and Queen Isabella was from Castile. Their marriage meant that the two kingdoms were unified together as one Spain, and it also ended the Muslim rule in Granada. This was the last holdout of the Muslim Empire in Spain. And together they secured power over their popes, they ended the Muslim kingdom of Granada, and they also funded somebody named Christopher Columbus to go on an expedition. We'll get to that in our next unit. So again, here is where we are with late Middle Ages Europe. We have the Holy Roman Empire kind of loosely organized. Same thing with Italy. France is more or less where France is today. We have England, Scotland, and Ireland all separate. And then we also have Castile and Aragon. The green countries are the territories that were loyal to the Pope in Rome, whereas the purple countries are loyal to the Pope in Avignon, right there. However, after the Great Schism ends, we eventually have the Pope sitting in Rome once more. All these areas are still Catholic and supporting the Pope in the Vatican, respect the Pope in the Vatican, and but they do emerge as separate kingdoms that don't always get along. So this leads us into the time period of the Renaissance, which literally means rebirth in French, as you read in class today. And it's used to describe the period of Italian history and European history from 1350 to 1550. The earliest terms of the Renaissance start in 1350 in Italy, but by the 1500s we really see the Renaissance spread all the way throughout Europe, into the Netherlands, into England, into France, throughout those kingdoms that we just talked about. And traditionally, it is known as the revival or rebirth of classical antiquity. Remember, we said the classics or the classical time period is the ancient past. So Greco-Roman traditions, politics, scholarships, arts, and literature, they basically wanted to bring back Rome. It is basically 200 years of Throwback Thursday to the Roman Empire, is what they thought they were doing. Now, our question for this unit is going to be to really study this and wonder whether or not this is true. Were they really trying to bring that back, or was that just a claim when in reality they were kind of using their influences of many different cultures to create a brand new culture? So this is largely thanks to the Byzantine scholars who saved materials from the Greeks and Romans, and the Muslim scholars who translated them. Remember, they have contact with all these people who maintained this culture and built upon this culture and added their own innovations, and then they start to borrow bits and pieces of this culture. So it's also the revival of secularism. If something is secular, it means worldly, not religious. It's not anti-religion, it's just different from religion. So for instance, our government is a secular government. It's not tied to the church in any way, shape, or form. It's also the revival of individuality, which is valuing human beings and individual worth versus the collective common good and working towards the safety and security of one kingdom. It's now working towards the safety and security of myself and my rights. So we're going to get to all this. This will really tee us up for the rest of the year and definitely for the rest of the unit.